I did not do anything to them that they had not already done to someone else. And I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest, because this is not a story about cruelty. This is a story about mirrors and what happens when people who have spent years treating others as disposable finally meet someone who learned from watching them and gave them nothing new, gave them nothing invented, gave them exactly themselves, handed back with interest, and the night they left me alone at that restaurant table with a $412 bill and walked out laughing. I was 26 years old and I had $40 in my checking account, and I sat there while the server looked at me with genuine pity and I paid it on. A credit card I could not afford, and I walked to my car and I did not cry and I did not call anyone. And I just sat in the parking lot and I thought about the fact that these were my colleagues, my team, my people. And I thought about every other person they had done this to before me. And I made a decision that took 4 years to execute. And last spring, I sat in the same chair Marcus Webb had been sitting in for 11 years, and I signed the paperwork that made his company mine, and I gave him nothing new, I just gave him himself. My name is Rachel Garrett, and I am 32 years old, and I run a brand strategy consultancy that I built from a laptop and a spare bedroom. And before that, I was a junior account manager at a mid-size marketing firm called Webb Creative, which was founded by Marcus Webb, who was the kind of man who had built his entire personality around the performance of generosity while actually being one of the most transactional people I have ever encountered. And Marcus had a move he did with junior employees, and the move was this. He would take them to lunch or dinner as a team bonding gesture. He would order generously. He would encourage everyone to get whatever they wanted. He would make the whole evening feel warm and inclusive, and then, at the end of the meal, he would excuse himself to take a call, and the senior staff would excuse themselves to use the restroom, and they would all simply leave, and the most junior person at the table would be left with the bill. And Marcus had been doing this for years before I arrived, and I know this because 3 people told me about it during my first month, and I thought they were exaggerating. And then it happened to me on a Tuesday night in November at an Italian restaurant where the table had ordered 2 bottles of wine I hadn't touched and appetizers I hadn't ordered, and Marcus stood up mid-dessert and said he had a client emergency, and smiled at everyone and said sort out the bill and walked out, and then one by one the senior people remembered somewhere they needed to be, and within 4 minutes I was alone with breadcrumbs and empty glasses and a server who brought me the check without making eye contact because she had clearly seen this before at this specific table. And the bill was $412, and I was 26 and I paid it, and I never said a word to anyone about it because I had watched what happened to the person who complained before me, which was that Marcus told everyone she couldn't handle team culture and she was gone within 2 months. What that bill cost me was not just money, and I need you to understand the actual damage, because the money was painful but recoverable. What was not immediately recoverable was what I watched it do to the people who stayed and kept absorbing it. Because Marcus's method was not only the restaurant trick, it was a pattern of making people feel included right up until the moment they needed something real, and then finding a reason why that thing was not possible, and I watched him do it with promotions he promised and restructured. I watched him do it with raises. He floated and then forgot. I watched him do it with credit for campaigns that junior staff had built from nothing, and Marcus would present their work in client meetings without mentioning their names, and if they raised it privately, he would say, I championed you in that room. Rachel, do you know how many people I could have put in that meeting, and they would feel grateful for being erased? And I watched a woman named Simone spend 3 years building Webb Creative's most successful client portfolio, and then watch Marcus hire someone externally for the director role she had been verbally promised. And when Simone resigned, Marcus told the team she had decided to pursue other opportunities, and he said it warmly, like he was proud of her, and 2 people actually congratulated him for being supportive. And I watched all of this, and I kept a document. The document was not dramatic, it was just specific, and I had been keeping it since month 3, because I had grown up watching my mother run a small business, and she had always said that the most important thing in any professional environment is knowing what is actually happening versus what people are saying is happening. And what was actually happening at Webb Creative was that Marcus had built a company on the labor and loyalty of people he systematically undervalued, and the company was genuinely good, the work was strong, the client list was real, and the problem was entirely structural, which was that Marcus made every significant decision alone, kept all external relationships personal to himself, and had never built any system that didn't require him at the center. And that is not a character observation, that is a business vulnerability. And I understood it completely by the end of year 2. And I left at the start of year 3 and I started my own consultancy. And I spent the next 2 years being very quiet and very deliberate and very focused on 2 things, which were building my own client base and watching Webb Creative from the outside. What I designed was not punishment, it was reflection. And the difference matters to me because punishment is about making someone feel pain, and reflection is about showing someone the shape of what they built. And Marcus had built a company that existed entirely on relationships he controlled personally, and I began very gently and very professionally reaching out to those relationships, not to poach them, not to undercut him, but simply to be available and to do good work, and word travels in this industry faster than people think. And within 18 months, I had worked with 4 former Webb Creative clients on smaller projects and done well. And within 24 months, 2 of those clients had moved their primary accounts to my firm, and within 30 months, Marcus was in a cash flow situation that required outside investment, and he reached out to 3 potential investors. And one of those investors called me first because we had worked together the previous year, and asked what I knew about Webb Creative, and I told him exactly what I knew, which was factual and documented, and the investor passed, and the second investor passed, and the third investor made an offer that was significantly below what Marcus needed, and Marcus had to consider selling, and the person his broker brought to the table was me. I want to tell you what the meeting was like because it matters. Marcus walked in, and he did not recognize me for the first 30 seconds, and then he did, and his face did something complicated, and he said, "Rachel," and I said, "Marcus," and he said, "I didn't know you were the buyer," and I said, "I know," and he said, "This is quite a coincidence," and I said, "It really isn't." And he sat down and we went through the terms, and the terms were fair. The valuation was accurate. I did not lowball him. I did not trick him. I simply bought what he had built at the price it was worth in its current condition, which was diminished because the company's value had always lived in relationships that had quietly redistributed themselves over 3 years. And Marcus signed, and afterward he said, "I always knew you were talented." And I said, "I know Marcus," and I said it the same way he used to say things like that, and I think he heard it because he didn't say anything else. The first thing I did when the acquisition closed was call Simone, who had been freelancing for 2 years since she left, and I offered her the director role she had been promised and never given. And she said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Completely." And she said, "At Webb Creative," and I said, "At Garrett Creative, formerly Webb." And she laughed for a long time, and then she said yes. And the second thing I did was implement a policy that every client presentation credits the team members who built the work by name, every single one. And the third thing I did was take the entire staff to dinner on the company, and I stayed for the whole meal, and I paid the bill myself, and I left last. And the irony of that is not lost on me, and I did not invent a new way to settle this. I just spent 4 years making sure that everything Marcus had used as a tool turned into the exact mechanism of his own outcome. And he disposed of people like they were temporary, and those people redistributed their loyalty and their talent and their client relationships to someone who treated them like they were permanent, and the company followed. And that is not revenge. That is just the long arithmetic of how you treat people, catching up with itself, and the only thing I added was patience.